How do we achieve deep reading in a digital world? I was recently reading The Shallows by Nicholas Carr, and I'm honestly surprised that I never read this before because it's a great book and a topic that I'm very interested in. And of course, somewhat defiantly read it on the Kindle and a digital version of the book. But what Carr talks about is how we are losing the ability to read deeply and understand concepts at a much deeper level. Because when we read in a digital world, what our brains are doing is rewiring themselves to that medium and becoming more adept at wanting to consume really fast information as well as get through to the point as quickly as possible, which has only accelerated with AI and things being able to give us instant answers rather than going through a book and deeply reading it to understand and pull out the topic. And even in the book, which was written over 10 years ago, Carr was cautioning about some of the AI that was rising at the time or around the idea of what it was going to look like. And it's shocking to see how far we've come since then with things like ChatGPT and Claude and these other LLMs that we can now basically turn to as a personal assistant for any knowledge management that we want. And so on this channel, since I talk a lot about reading in the digital world with Kindles and iPads and about how we use technology for skill acquisition, I really thought it would be interesting to dive more into this deep reading concept and ask yourself the question, how do you achieve deep reading in the digital world? So first off, what is deep reading? And it's basically the same as what deliberate practice is applied to reading. Now, when we talk about reading books and not being distracted by other things, that would mean you're cutting off access and eliminating any distractions that could interfere with that reading session, whether you're also simultaneously scrolling through social media or checking the news or watching TV in the background. Deep reading is meant to be more challenging and intense so that you focus fully on the topics and what you are consuming, ideally in books or longer form, but sometimes great articles can also apply to this deep reading concept. Now, the keys to this practice are that you're focusing intensely on the book, that one thing and nothing else, as well as having clear goals for the reading session, whether that is a time bound that you've set, or you also are just wanting to get through a certain chapter, certain number of pages, or understand one concept. And that leads to getting immediate feedback through interacting in your mind and maybe on paper with the author's topics and the concepts so that you can understand at a deeper level. This pushes you to the edge of finding flow while reading, but the difference between flow state and this more deep reading deliberate practice is that you're often trying to challenge yourself further than your current skill level and beyond, which means it's going to push you out of the flow zone, and that's okay. Understanding and appreciating that we're entering into deep reading mode at a different focus level than normal means that we also are okay with the fact that sometimes it's going to be very hard. This means that we put Do Not Disturb on or set a dedicated reading mode on your iPad so that it's not going to have any potential distractions while you're reading. Thankfully, the Kindle is pretty well a single tasking machine, although sometimes if I am getting bored or disengaged with what I'm reading, I'll find that you switch out, go into the library and pick up reading something different. That's something to be aware of if you have a tendency towards that, on whether you need to read more physical books or just be mindful to not accept and jump into that temptation for yourself. Now, the next thing that we can do to enter into deep reading mode and avoid these distractions is to time block our reading sessions when the goal is this deep reading. This allows us to treat this session as seriously as any other block of work or a meeting that you have. Time blocking is an act of declaring war on distractions. You choose to focus on one thing at a time, and so it's inexcusable to switch out of reading mode in order to jump into social media and scrolling or distracting yourself in any other way. The key here is to plan this deep reading time block in advance so that you're not left deciding to do it last minute when you're tired after work and you just want to jump into binge watching Netflix or spending time scrolling through social media when you've already blocked out and set aside this time for deep reading that you really care about. It's going to be that much more realistic that you actually stick to that without distraction. Now, only you can decide how much is the appropriate amount of deep reading time to start with, but I'd suggest going with 30 to 60 minute time blocks at least 3 to 4 times per week. Just like with deep work sessions, anything less than 30 minutes is not going to be enough time for this deep reading, because you'll have to sort of ease into it and get better at it over the first few weeks. The first few minutes or 10-15 minutes of a session when you're just getting started may be a bit of a grind as you're trying to like warm up those gears and engage your deep reading and focus at a different level from what you're used to. Another thing that we can do in order to achieve this deep reading in this shallow world is to pick up more physical books. In the past, I've talked very tongue-in-cheek about eliminating physical books altogether because the Kindle is such a great device. And if we're somebody that is looking to have one device to rule them all, we jump into the world of iPads or tablets where we don't have to have multiple devices to manage reading and other activities. But there's still something magical about physical books when it comes to wanting to achieve this deep reading. I never really get completely out of touch with physical books. I usually have one on the go per month because of that nostalgia, the feeling of reading on paper, and just the slower pace that it brings about to something that I want to engage deeply in. It's an important part of my learning and skill acquisition process to be deliberate on choosing specific books that I want to read physical copies of. Some of the research that Carr draws on in The Shallows is on how we retain more information if it's read in a physical book rather than on a tablet. It's as if the fast page turns and rapid loading of thousands of pages instantly tricks our brain into also wanting to gain that information instantly rather than process it sequentially. Because the medium of a digital device is to expect fast hits of dopamine on social media or instant answers on Google, the way that we read on a tablet is also the same, and it expects a more immediate gratification than the long process of reading a book deeply. If this is true, and you can reflect on this yourself and think about whether it matters enough to you or not, but for me, I take this to heart that if there is a topic that I care deeply enough about, that I really want to understand on a deeper level, I'm going to choose to go towards physical books with those. As you can maybe see from my background, there is a premium on bookshelf space for me. So for me, the books that I'm going to prioritize reading physical copies of are either going to be ones that I want to read mostly for career development and skill acquisition, or from my favorite authors that I really care about buying a physical copy of and having on hand. Over time, you'll get a good sense of the definition of what this means for you, so don't stress too much about whether you go with a Kindle copy or another ebook version or a physical copy as you're trying to navigate what deep reading means for you. Now, the final thing that I want to touch on in this video is using advanced technologies that we've got today to enhance our reading and comprehension, because I'm not totally bought into the concept that the shallows has affected our reading to the degree that Carr writes about in his book, I think there's a lot of good that comes from some of the ways that we can more appropriately use technology to our advantage with learning. But it's important to also be aware that we will want to sometimes get into physical books to achieve this deep reading state. The first one is building a second brain. If you haven't read Tiago Forte's book, Building a Second Brain, or watched any of his videos on his YouTube channel, this is an important skill to have, especially if you do a lot of work on computers, which almost everybody does these days. Now, if you can get some of the basic ideas from this Building a Second Brain methodology, like the para folder structure, it's going to go a long way on organizing all the information that comes into your world in a more sane and controlled way in your computer or whichever app you use the most for note-taking and project management. Since learning about it and having it become more of second nature on how I do things on my computer and in my folder structures, I've been able to remember more, as well as also know where to find information when I've stored it, because it all follows this appropriate structure that makes it very easy to get back to. Because we can't simply remember every single thing, and it seems like our to-do lists and projects become just so much more overwhelming when we have all these digital things going on, Para and the Building a Second Brain methodology really helps you to remember things even when you've forgotten them. You'll know where to find them and go back to them whenever you need. And that is one of the most powerful things about having this harmonious balance between the real world and digital world in what we do today. One of the other arguments in the shallows is that we've lost our ability to retain information because of our short attention spans and the wanting to always get that instant gratification online. Now, I don't know about you, but since graduating university, I've become even more of a learner than I ever was in the past. And reading, trying to acquire new information, I find that if I don't have a way to store all of this externally to my own brain, then I've forgotten so much more than what is kind of front and center to my attention. So it makes perfect sense to me to have a digital storage device for organizing all the thoughts and ideas that come to me over time. So building a second brain and having a place that you store all of your notes that's organized in a sensible manner means that you've got a near perfect personal assistant for everything that you've learned in the past. And so you can turn to that when you need to pull back and get the information that you're looking for. The second thing is Readwise. If building a second brain is like supercharging your ability to remember information, then Readwise is like an adrenaline injection to that second brain. Readwise syncs your book notes and highlights so that they can automatically export into whichever note storage system you use, whether that's Notion, Evernote, Roam, Obsidian. All the most popular tools are able to be exported to with Readwise. Now, this works seamlessly in the background, which is really great, especially if you read on Kindle or on your iPad, because you can just highlight all of the notes that you think are most important and have them automatically go into the folder structure that you set for them. And this just makes it so much more powerful when it comes to wanting to reference back to those books that you've read, or even with the power of its reader app, you can highlight articles and podcast notes, YouTube videos, whatever you want from anywhere. Even email newsletters allows you to automatically just have this all go into one perfectly organized central system for yourself. So this is something that I use daily because the app will resurface highlights for you, and I'll read through these. It'll help me to generate ideas on some of the topics that I'm writing about in the moment, or for future topic ideas. It's just a really great way to space repetition, the information that you've read in the past, so that it comes back to mind again over time. And the third way that I like to pair advancements in technologies to reading and understanding and improving my comprehension is with short form. Because short form creates the best book summaries and guides, I use it as a way to read initially into different book topics, decide which ones I want to either purchase as physical copies or go deeper into, as well as look back on through the exercises and prompts that come up in the book guides so that I can understand on a deeper level and from somebody else's perspective what those book topics are about. It allows you to get the perspective and the summary of the book from a professional writer so that you can pair that with your own understanding and what you've taken away from the book to get this more enhanced, deeper level of comprehension. So I'd love to get your thoughts. This book was eye-opening to me. Have you read it before? Is it something that you are concerned about as far as your deep reading, or are you perfectly content with the system that you've got set up, whether you read on Kindle, on an iPad, or you turn back to physical books a lot? So let me know, are you concerned about technology affecting your deep reading? Or is it something where you see the benefits of new technologies outshining the potential risk?